So I think I'm just going to get started. Thank you. Welcome to Decolonizing Open Science Symposium, Dismantling Global Hierarchies of Knowledge. Like I said, it's our first community development activity of the year, and we're very happy to have you all with us. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I'm sure the majority of us know how to use Zoom quite fluently at this point, but just in case, these are just some housekeeping points and some reminders. The Zoom feature is that we want to highlight is that it's a movable window. So of course, we're doing this depending on where you are in the world. For us, we're doing this in the middle of a work day. So if you're joining us, but you may want to just kind of have us playing in the background, or you may need to answer some emails while you're listening in. You can move the window around, you can minimize it and still be a part of the conversation. If you feel at any point that any of our speakers, including myself, are speaking too fast, please do just raise your hand using that function, and that will alert the speakers to the fact that they need to slow down. And please feel free to use the chat for raising any technical issues, for introducing yourself, for offering any commentary about the event. But if you have any content-related questions, if you want to pose any questions directly to any of our speakers, please do use the Q&A box. Otherwise, many of your questions might get missed out. We might not read them. They might get skipped over. So please do use the Q&A box for those types of questions. Next slide, please. So just a quick run through of our agenda today. I will be starting us off with a quick welcome and introduction, giving a historical context of decolonization, academic colonialism, and effectively why we're here today, why the landscape looks the way it does today, and kind of that theoretical foundation that we'll then jump off of. We'll then move on to our speaker from the International Science Council, Vanessa McBride, who will talk to us about open science as a global public good. Before moving on to our representative of the National Research Foundation of South Africa, Dr. Nokuthulam Chunu, who will discuss decolonizing scholarly communications, the process and model in itself, before we touch on global metrics and biases within these frameworks, a presentation that will be given to us by Saru Khanna, who's a representative from the Public Knowledge Project. And then we'll also look at inclusivity and equitable open science and multilingualism from the managing director of DOAJ, Professor Kamal Belhamen. Community-based initiatives to decolonize open science, a presentation that will be given to us by Jessica Malouch, who is a director at the Qasimi Foundation. And then Dr. Emily Choinaski, who you can see here, who is our head of operations at Forum. She'll talk about the work that Forum has been doing to nurture Arab voices in open science and focusing more on inclusive language. And then we'll be wrapping up with different ways to integrate inclusivity. Sorry, I don't know this new acronym, but I know it to be inclusivity, diversity, and inclusion, and equitability, and decolonization in the era of open science. I'm sure when Hassan Johnson jumps on from NYU Abu Dhabi to talk more about the subject, he'll be able to give us the proper acronym and what all of the letters stand for. And then finally, we will then move on to the panel discussion, which will be a moderated discussion. And I'll have some questions to pose to the panelists, but then also it will then be the opportunity for you all to ask your questions. So we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience as well. I will slow down because I see that there is a raised hand. So thank you, Yasmin, for that. Next slide, please. So just to start us off, before I give the floor to the experts in the room, who will dive into the nuances of our topic, I want to begin by first introducing a few foundational theories and concepts that will help tether a thread between each presentation and help you as our audience, hopefully, critically reflect on what you're about to hear and to contextualize it within the region or your region, or within your own professional and personal lives. So, as you know, today's event is centered around the concept of decolonization and its applicability to academic systems and structures. Next slide, please. So, while the word decolonization itself has become almost mainstream in its use by social scientists and cultural critics from around the world. Oftentimes, these conversations fail to actually define what decolonization is. In mainstream rhetoric, decolonization is usually conflated with concepts like diversity and inclusion, which focus more on increasing the representation of Brown and Black people and including them within the already existing social, political, and economic structures of today's world. Also pointing out not just Brown and Black people, but just people who do not fit the stereotypical or hegemonic identity of the global system. While diversity, inclusion, and equity strategies are definitely valuable for building a more equitable and just society and do play an important role in the decolonial process, they don't fully encapsulate the mission and goals of decoloniality. And it can be argued that at times, DEI itself could be placed under decolonial critique. Next slide, please. Decolonization has several definitions, depending on if you look at it from a traditionalist or postmodernist perspective. But for the purpose of today's conversation, I'll be referring to it specifically as the process of identifying colonial legacies on ideologies, structures, and relationships that impact social, cultural, and economic activity within our globalized system. Decolonization, at its intellectual core, is highly critical and radical, and is a radical approach to understanding the way the world works today, and is ultimately supposed to be used as a means to reverse or revolutionize the ideas and systems left behind by empires and conquests. So as you can see here, I've added some words on the slide that kind of define or help narrow down the definition of decolonization. And one of the words I use is uncomfortable, because oftentimes conversations around decolonization they're not supposed to be comfortable. They're not supposed to be easy to fit within the existing systems. Next slide, please. Decolonization can be used to question systems like capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and individualism, which often intersect and can actually rarely be isolated from each other. But the legacy of colonialism that I would like to zone in on for the purpose of today's event is academic colonialism. So academic colonialism is a term that was coined by Walter Mignolo in the late 20th century, who built an academic career around studying the impact of colonization on knowledge production within the Latin American context. When most of the global South was swallowed up by European conquests, a lot changed. The concept of the nation state, or even just countries that we take for granted today, was introduced and imposed on communities that had previously operated under very different social systems that colonial officers saw as too barbaric or backwards to fit into their empire's image. Our economies, legal systems, infrastructure, and so much more were reshaped and restructured to fit into the Western mold. But perhaps the greatest shift that was experienced was within indigenous knowledge systems. Knowledge that was produced and shared by indigenous populations, as well as through the use of indigenous language, was effectively erased from social and institutional domains and replaced with Western philosophies of knowledge. Next slide, please. In his essay, The Geopolitics of Knowledge and the Colonial Difference, Mignolo refers to Sir Francis Bacon, who many of you may know as the father of modern science, and that was how he was referred to in Western scientific communities. And Mignolo specifically references Sir Francis Bacon's belief that only 3 faculties of knowledge existed, 1 being memory, 2 imagination, and 3 reason. Keeping in mind that these 3 faculties were seen through a very European lens, and so they weren't open to exploring, let's say, if the way that a Sufi philosopher may have interpreted them, may have interpreted imagination or reason differently to how Sir Francis Bacon would have, for example. And Sir Francis Bacon was quoted to say that these 3 divisions were the core of Western knowledge production, and that, quote, there can be no others. This ideology was accepted by majority of the Western academic elite, and as a result was later exported to the colonies and was used as a replacement to indigenous knowledge systems. Next slide. Mignolo stated that while, quote, the three emanations of knowledge have been expanded and modified in subsequent years, the assertion there can be no others has been maintained. There can be no others inscribed a conceptualization of knowledge to a geopolitical space, being Western Europe, and erase the possibility of even thinking about a conceptualization and distribution of knowledge emanating from local histories, those being from within the South, in the global South or the colonies, previous colonies. So he eradicated or erased this idea that any knowledge could ever be founded or produced anywhere outside of Western Europe or outside of Western philosophy. This mindset is at the foundation of academic colonialism, as the global North became the center of knowledge and the global South at its periphery. And any authority on knowledge was stripped away from the colonized, who could only participate in scientific research as either subjects to be studied or within the confines of Western languages, practices, and methodologies. So, while today's academic landscape is, of course, nowhere near as bleak as the historical picture I've just painted, much of the legacies of the past have left an imprint on how things operate today, which include biases within global metric models, language barriers, how we place value on some research over others, and the financial and geographical limitations that are imposed on researchers from the global South. And these are all topics that I'm sure many of our upcoming speakers are going to dive much deeper into. So I'm not going to dive into that myself. Next slide, please. I will, however, try to contextualize the problem within today's event by acknowledging a few things. Firstly, as you'll hear from Professor Kemal Bekhemen shortly, who will talk to us about the importance of multilingualism within open science and academia, I want to acknowledge that language is a weapon and can be used for both inclusion and exclusion in itself. And we know that by using English as the main language of today's event, we may be excluding many people from this region and beyond who would otherwise have gained or offered much insight into the discussion. This is an unfortunate reality for many, but we made this decision intentionally simply because we want or we hope to be able to include as many people from around the world as possible. And fortunately or unfortunately, English remains a dominant language in international arenas. We are, of course, working as Forum to build more Arabic into our communications, which Dr. Emily Czernaski will talk more about shortly as well. Secondly, I want to address the problem of capacity building and how it can often feed into the imbalances of power. So many of these free online events that we do here at Forum are geared towards supporting our community with their aspirations in academia, whether as researchers or institutions. And that means there's a degree of capacity building that is always taking place at any given time as we're offering expert advice and we're kind of sort of telling you what to do or what best practices are, with the hope of helping our regional community gain credibility and authority within the global open science arena. And this is a very difficult space to navigate, and we try to strike the balance between properly equipping our community with the skills needed, while also recognizing the inherent flaws in the system that we're working within. But that's why conversations like today's are so important, because it allows us to build a better understanding and relationship with our community and your needs, and also have frank and transparent conversations about the biases that exist in today's open science landscape. Forum isn't shy from having these difficult conversations, and transparency is key to our success. So we're always open to hearing from our community about solutions and ideas to approach this issue. Most importantly, these conversations can help arm us against these biases and work to reimagine and restructure a future that does decoloniality justice by decentering the global North as the only authority over knowledge, and building a system that values and upholds knowledge from all, not just the few. And the last thing I want to acknowledge is that this topic is extremely nuanced, and frankly, there's no right or wrong answer to anything that we're about to discuss. There are no concrete solutions to the problems we're facing, and there is no way that our humble 2-hour symposium is going to give us magical solution to the world's greatest inequalities. What it will do is keep a very important conversation going and showcase the existing efforts of organizations that are sitting with us on today's panel, and their efforts that are working to try and find or contribute to solutions to the problem. And ultimately, we hope that we'll be feeding into a larger global academic effort, being made to try and heal the world, one research article at a time. And as I close, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you all to reflect critically on what was said and what is to come, as, like I've mentioned in the beginning, critical thinking is at the core of decolonization. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, so thank you. There's my email. Oops, sorry, go back one sec, Joy. At any point throughout your time with us at Forum, if there's ever anything that you want to contribute or any questions you have, or even solutions that you want to share with us that could potentially help, you can always email me at neil.nassar@forumforopen.org. So now I'll be introducing our next speaker, and I'll be giving the floor over to her. So please welcome Vanessa McBride. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Vanessa McBride from the International Science Council, who is the science director, and she will be talking to us about how open science could act as a public good and can truly support the development of a more equal ecosystem. So over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Nahil, for that fantastic introduction. What I love about these talks is that I learn something new every time, and I think I've already learned something new today. Right, so colleagues, I hope you should see my screen. You should see a picture of a recent deep field image of the sky taken by the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST. And I think I'm not going to pretend that I have any ideas on best practice. But I think what's so valuable about these discussions is really to hear from everyone else. And so the little short overview that I'll give today is really just to try and see what input we can have with each other, and what conversations we can have that can sort of drive this process of inclusion and an awareness of what these legacies of colonialism are and how we can change them going forward. So I wanted to start with an astronomy example because in a previous lifetime, I was an astronomer and probably still am. But I think ideas have always influenced and shaped science and maybe ideologies. And that's a statement that is as true today in this discussion that we're having as it was many thousands of years ago when some of our ancestors first looked at the sky. And in fact, it was this idea of the ancient Greeks that got us stuck for many thousands of years in a concept or a model of the universe where the Earth is at the center. And so despite the fact that there were many observations that were taking place of actual motions of planets in the sky that seemed to suggest that motions were not circular, that orbits of planets were not circular, and that maybe the Earth was not at the center, it seems as if this ideology of perfect circles was so strong in the minds of the ancient Greeks and of the subsequent generations of people who study the sky that it took an incredibly long time to dismantle this notion. And in fact, you can see even a few thousand years later, when Galileo produced observations that strongly supported an idea of the universe where the sun was the center of our solar system and Earth and other planets orbited it, even then, religious ideology was so strong that Galileo, as a scientist, was excommunicated from the church for proposing this sort of preposterous idea that went against these ideologies. And I think this kind of really is a worked example of what we're facing today. You know, the way that we have science today has been shaped by the ideologies and the points of view from the global north that Nahil has explained to us, right? And so how can we really dismantle some of these ideas and open science in a way that will allow much broader participation and much broader contribution. So I just want to sort of introduce my organization at this point. I'm the science director for the International Science Council. And our organization is a global organization. We're based in Paris, but we have a membership that comprises quite a wide variety of scientific members. So some of them are national and regional associations. So these could be academies or research councils. We also have a membership of disciplinary bodies. So there's about 45 different institutions and associations. And those include natural and social sciences. And then we have a number of other affiliated bodies. Some are more on the research producing side, other are more on the community, sort of academic community cohesion side. And with this kind of membership, the ISC's vision is really to advance science as a global public good. And so what that means for us is that, you know, we see science and its practice as something that everyone has the right to participate in, and that everyone has the right to benefit from. But that also means that in our practice of science, we have to participate responsibly. So there's sort of two aspects that define science as a global public good, at least for the International Science Council. And one of the aspects is internal to the scientific system itself. So by that, we mean an evolution of how we do science in a way that can be more efficient, more fair. So looking at these imbalances in knowledge production or access to knowledge between the global north and south. And of course, also more trustworthy in the way that we trust our results, we make science that's reproducible and that's accessible. But we also see that science has an important external role to play. So not just within the community of scientists, but facing society itself. So in this kind of role, there's the possibility that everyone can have access to science. And of course, in order for science to contribute to actionable knowledge and change in the world, I mean, we're faced with huge problems at the moment, looking at things like climate change and issues around social cohesion. How can science inform some of the policies and the implementations of the science that's needed to address those big issues? And I think open science is a key enabler in both of these goals. So it's an enabler in terms of change that needs to happen internal to our science system, and it's an enabler in terms of some of the science and society and science and policy changes that need to happen outside of our system. So some of the work that ISC has done internal to the science system, so that's really looking at the evolution of the system itself, has been about some principles around scientific publishing. So remember, this is really just a very small, de-scoped section of the problem. I mean, the issue with our science systems is that all of these things, like research, assessment, and everything, is based on ideas that are probably now a bit out of touch with current realities. But a start has been made with these two reports that we published at the end of last year. The first one is around key principles for scientific publishing. Second one is a bit of a longer essay around reform for scientific publishing. But really the idea of open science is at the heart of this. This is a graphic that's supposed to show the 8 principles for scientific publishing. And I know the writing is tiny on this. But basically, principles 1 and 2 are firmly grounded in this concept of open science. And this concept that the knowledge that we produce, often using publicly funded means, should be available and accessible to the public. And it should be presented in a way as well that can impact beyond just the realm of science itself. So really, in terms of the first one, it's around open access for research findings, and the second of these principles is around open licenses that allow us to use the data that has been generated through publicly funded science. So that's sort of one of the small aspects of work that we're doing on open science. But I wanted to come back out to the big picture of open science and decolonization now, with these 5 points that I think we could use to drive a really interesting discussion. And I'm excited to see that a few of the speakers will address these points. So when we look at the legacies of colonization, we can see that there's a clear impact on these science systems. One of them is a mistrust of science, because as Nahil alluded to, in the era of colonization and imperialist science, many local people were used as subjects of science rather than as participating in the process of science. And that is something that has to be, that has severe implications in communities' trust of scientists themselves. And we saw this happening in terms of COVID vaccinations. Many communities were quite reticent at coming forward to have a COVID vaccine because of this history of being exploited and researched themselves. And so they could be very mistrustful of modern science. Another of the aspects that open science can potentially help with is interfacing with these other knowledge systems. So one of those knowledge systems might be traditional or indigenous-based knowledge systems. And when science is behind paywalls and not accessible to the public, that is when the interfaces between these systems are very difficult, because there's no common understanding, or there's no common platform where these two different types of knowledge systems can interact and potentially make this kind of actionable knowledge that can solve local and regional or even global issues. The languages of science, I think I won't say any more about that, because I know it's coming up. I mean, as we're giving this talk now, there's some definite benefits to having a language of science, but of course there are also severe drawbacks in terms of participation. And then I think one of the strengths of open science is that it is potentially a facilitator of this co-design project. If you look back into some of the works of people like Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it's clear that he advocates in that work for the principle of co-designing learning mechanisms in order to bring people on board. And open science is clearly a facilitator in that kind of co-design process. And then maybe just to come back to open science itself, let's also not be unaware of potential unintended consequences of open science and open access. So whilst open access is an important tool, let's not let it become an ideology in itself. And let's maintain that balance between the pragmatism of having open access and the ideology of it. So just to name a particular example there, we can see an unintended consequence, for example, from researchers on the African continent, where the changes in open access in Europe and the US, driven by things like Plan S, have meant that researchers who could previously publish their results for free in some journals are now faced with fairly hefty article processing charges. So whilst access is open in some ways, doors to access have closed in other ways. So I think I'll just leave it here, and these are points that we can pick up for the discussion later on. Back to you, Nahil.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I feel like that was such a wonderful overview of looking at open science and the ways that we can all engage with this, this entity, whether from the global south or the global north, to build a more equitable system. Okay, so we will move on swiftly to our next speaker, who is Dr. Nokuthula Mchunu, the Deputy Director of the National Research Foundation of South Africa, and she's going to be talking to us about decolonizing scholarly communications as a model in its own right. So over to you, Knox.
Thank you, Nahil. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
For me, so I'm going to try to cover some of the maybe not so usual discussion on scholarly communication. I know Vanessa started picking a thread on those unintended consequences, for example, finance and we know certain bias within the scholarly communication. But for this talk, I am trying maybe to let us think then answer. Maybe I have answers for question. I'm trying to prod some discussion on this. So for me, I will start. I will speak on the African continent because the African Open Science Platform, which I'm the deputy director of, is part of trying to work on open science in this region. So the continent has more than 1.3 billion people, represent 17% of the population, and then the population that is active economically is just about 37%, has 50% of the population, and they are highlighted in green, has the youngest median age of the population. But if you look at also the population that is living nearly less than $2 a day. So if you look at what open science requires, some of this as a base, as a structure, for example, internet connectivity. If you look in the global north, the percent internet connectivity are going above 90, 80%. But if you look at the global south, is ranging, except maybe for South America, is ranging less than 50%. So this now again creates some already questions on, yes, you might have something open, but is it accessible for everyone? We should think about this also. Sorry. And then I picked up an example on just thinking on uneven access to things that should have been openly accessible for everyone. And we know in South Africa, our government was quite vocal in trying to get this vaccine rollout. So if you look at percentages, the vaccine rollout or access to vaccine, Africa only had 8%. Even certain global south regions like South America had more access than us, which begs the question again, do we have a similar inclusive and equitable access to resources that are there globally? Right, so I picked up a few things that I think that need maybe to be addressed to address scholarly communication. Yes, we have talked a lot about what the publishers do and why we think these are inequitable, but how we as universities, as researchers, participate in these structures of these activities that actually are the foundation or support this colonization or inequitable access to scholarly communication. So for example, some now, do we think, for example, certain services, I'm using an example here as a Web of Science, are they promoting open science? Are they promoting equal access or a view to knowledge that is? This is the question that we need to think about. Another question that we need to think about, again, most of the universities and even in the global south are in this race of university rankings. Do they promote open science? Do they promote equity? Do they, again, promote access to resources in scholarly publication? And again, one of the things that are related in scholarly publication is now data. So we think data and data infrastructure to access them is, once the infrastructure is open, everybody can access it. In reality, not so. So you ask the question again, where are these resources sitting? If you look, the majority of them are sitting in the global north, in the US, in the UK, and in the EU. But if you then ask the question, who has access to this global infrastructure or this open infrastructure, you can see here, basically, these two graphs shows you a number of countries that were used in this experiment, where they showed how using the US as a control, how they are able to access or not access or being blocked into accessing these global structures. If you look again, if you look for the sake of this conversation, a lot of countries in the Arab-speaking world are actually blocked from accessing some of these global infrastructures that are supposedly open for research and for use for everyone. And then I will talk again, what drives scholarly communication is what we call research assessment. Why do researchers publish and publish where they publish is research assessment. I picked up again, Cora published this recently to say this, they have the membership, and I am in support of this initiative by Cora. But again, let's look who are the members of such activities in open science. When Nahil gave us this topic, I also read it kind of like, how also can we think about decolonizing the actual open science? Not the other activities of research and science as a whole, not just decolonizing science, but how can we then decolonize this open science? Because if it's not done properly, it has an opportunity or something that it will even drive the gap or bigger or be a conduit for, again, the global south being left behind. So if you look again, as I talked about this, most of the members that sit in this such an important research assessment body that looks at using open science as a tool to assess research activities, none of them, maybe one is in Africa. What does this say about us? And you can see the concentration is mostly in the global north and nothing in the global south. Again, this is what I have discussed in many activities or gathering where open science is being discussed, how we as open science, I will use this word, activists or expert, also propagate or perpetuate some of these inequities that exist in society. So we have to be very, very deliberate on how we are very inclusive in this discussion and taking everybody forward and making sure no one is left behind. So for me, one of the things that, of course, that I wanted to talk about, and this has led to this, all these prevailing conditions in scholarly publication, your university rankings, your world of web of science, your certain publishing houses. What does it mean for Africa? It means that we are only said to only contribute about 3.5% of the scholarly publication. This is up to 2018. It hasn't changed that much. So are we really, as a continent, if you looked at my first slide, we contribute 1.3 billion. It means we have, in proportion, so much number of researchers. Can we not even reach 5? Can we not even reach 10%? Is this really possible? Or is the counting methodology not correct? Or is then the research that is done in Africa not of quality. That is the other argument that people would raise. But then I will show another graph that that is produced by, again, this group in Stellenbosch, that are Centromatic in South Africa. So if you look at, very interestingly, Africa. So researchers, if you look, that collaborate within their own country, it's about 40% of the total papers in a year. If you look, they contribute with other countries outside of Africa. It is about 50%, much higher than what people contribute, collaborate internally in their own countries. And then if we look, if a researcher in 2 different countries in Africa, do they work together? It is sitting barely 1% up. So from this graph tells you, African scientists don't collaborate together. They prefer to collaborate more with the global north or outside of their country than with people in their own country or in their own continent. Why is this? This is one of the reasons we should ask. Is it because they want their scholarly publication accepted more? This is what they've learned? Because they know if they have somebody from the global north who is the co-author, it'd be easy published. So it could also then impact what does the researcher in an African country researches. Is it a local context or is it something that is outside of their country? Can they communicate their work inside the country or not? So who determines the agenda for research and who determines what type of research that is done by that researcher? So I think all these questions we need to think about, and again, open science is an opportunity to use to address a lot of inequities, but if it's not done correctly, it can create more and drive or widen the gap.
I'm sorry, Dr. Knox, I'm so sorry, but we're over time. So
okay.
It's all right if I can perhaps suggest that maybe later on you can send over your slides, and we can perhaps share them with the community.
Thank
and
you.
I know that Joe is sitting with us and would like to also comment, but Joe, perhaps if you jump on for the panel, and that way we can kind of stay within our times, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think it's very complimentary to what Knox just said. We're also operating on the continent with Africa Archive. And yes.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was just going to say that unfortunately, because we've run over time.
Oh, we skipped for later. Sorry.
No, it's totally fine. So I was wondering if maybe perhaps we can move that portion.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get that.
Moving on. That's totally fine. It's totally fine. This is the problem with this topic, is that it's such a meaty, like juicy topic that we always want to, I feel like we can talk about it forever, really. And so it's very easy to get very carried away with it. But yeah, so we'll just jump right ahead to Saroop Khanna from PKP, who's going to be talking to us about global metrics and the biases that already exist within these frameworks. Of judgment. So go ahead, Saroop.
Thanks, Niall. I'll just share my screen. All right. So I will be talking today about metrics and frameworks that privilege best in academic practices and go against the process of decolonization in academic publishing. I see this as a two-pronged challenge, and I will be talking about these two aspects in my 10 minutes. The first part is the metrics that we use. And let me just start with an example here. So if we look at CIMAGO data for the last few years, so this data from 2022, and if we look at the countries which are hosting the top 100 journals in those journal rankings, we only see 3 countries. And the metric here that I'm using is the H index. So the journal H index essentially means that the largest number, H, such that H published articles have at least 8 citations each. And we see only 3 countries out of more than 200 that we have in this world. So maybe let me try a different metric. So I tried the CIMAGO journal rank itself, which is their own proclaimed metric, and which is basically weighted citations received by an article over the last 3 years. Again, you see the same 3 countries and 2 more. So you have the Netherlands and Switzerland in the list now. Let me try to change my metric again and maybe make it a little more simple. So if I try to use citations per article, as simple as that, and then I look at the countries hosting the top 100 ranked journals across all disciplines, I again see a very similar list. I do see 2 new countries. I have 2 journals now from China and 1 from Canada. But again, we do not see any substantial presence of global South countries. We have seen many metrics come up in the past. So there was going away from these traditional journal level or article level metrics. There have been things like number of views for an article, which was propagated by some medicine journals. Then there was usage, like how many times your article is downloaded. This is related to the altmetric scores that we see. There was also in 2011, I think in some medicine journals, they tried to use the number of tweets that you receive in the first week right after publication. They called it the TWIMPACT factor. And then there was this Twindex, also a metric which looked at the percentile rank after you've calculated your TWIMPACT factor. The reason I'm mentioning all these metrics is that regardless of which metric you use, the list of top journals and top countries that you see here kind of remains static. And the problem is not just with the metric, it's in the way we as humans consume and propagate information. I'm showing 2 graphs or networks here, and some of you who might be familiar with social network theory, maybe we can think of these nodes as articles, and the links between these nodes are citations, let's say. And the network on the right is a random network where you see that the number next to each node shows you how many articles are citing it. So for instance, this the top left node here has only 1 citation. But if you look at the other network, the scale-free network, which is more representative of how information really flows in our world, you see there is 1 node which has a lot of citations, like 7 citations, whereas everything else has much less than that. And the reason I'm showing this is because the internet, for instance, is an example of a scale-free network. We have a lot of papers, for instance, which will have very low citations, and very few papers which will have a lot of citations. And when you combine this phenomena with the fact that we have these different metrics, which are all based on citations or downloads or views, you end up with a situation where inequality is built into the system. You can't really escape from it. And as Nahil said in the beginning, there's no clear solution to this. It's just the way we consume information. And one clear example of this nature of information propagation is Google search results. This is basically how we click on results. Almost more than, I think, 50 to 60% of the clicks are received by the first result that you see on Google. And almost no one really goes beyond the first page, and you can see the graph flattening off. And I also want to point out another thing that the previous speaker spoke about, the share of population using the internet. You can see that in highly populous regions of the world, like South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, the internet coverage is extremely low. Even in the year 2019, it's less than 40%. So when you have a large amount of nodes in your network that do not even have access to internet, then you're essentially excluding their knowledge automatically, because they are not even present in the medium which we use to communicate scholarly practices. So this is one part of the puzzle where the metrics combined with the nature of information propagation, which is very unequal, is bringing us a big challenge. The second thing is frameworks. So in terms of frameworks, I want to talk about the databases or the resources that we use for academic research. And this is a graph of databases that we have used in scientometric studies over the last 28 years. And you can see that the top two are Web of Science and Scopus. And as most of you already know, these databases are very exclusionary in many ways. So they have this filtering for quality. I say that in quotes because they have many different ways to assess quality, and many of them are very contentious. So filtering for quality journals, it makes the problem worse because we already have a system in which information propagation is unequal, and then you have more filtering on top of that, and you result, and as an end result, you have a very, very biased system of information. And this goes against Global South research, which has been documented in previous papers by Cato and Alonso Gamboa, and more recently by Tennant. And we at the Public Knowledge Project tried to quantify this number for all these research indexes by comparing journals which use OJS, which is the PKP's software platform for hosting journals, to how much they overlap with these indexes. And if you just focus on the first two rows of this table, which is the Web of Science and Scopus, and the last column, you can see that Web of Science only has 1% overlap with journals which use OJS. And these are journals which are active, publishing more than 5 articles a year. And similarly for Scopus, it has 7%. So essentially, Web of Science is excluding 99% journals. A lot of them are in the Global South, which are actively publishing academic research. And this is problematic because there is this common assumption that these databases constitute the entirety of scientific literature. So I want to end my part here with two reflections. One is that there is no clear answer, as we have mentioned, but at the very least, we as academic researchers need to be humble when we make research claims. This is very contrary to when you publish or send an article to a top journal, you're trying to make a very surprising or hyperbolic claim. So we need to step away from that. And one example, it's very hard to do. And one example of that is there was a paper published which showed that how much of your body are you willing to give away for a publication in a top economics journal like AER? And the answer was almost half a thumb. And moving from that slightly cynical observation to one which is more problematic and needs more attention, is that there is significant unacknowledged bibliodiversity that already exists in the world. And this is a graph of journals using PKP's OJS in 60 languages, at least from 136 countries. 80% or 81% of these countries are from the Global South. And this needs to be acknowledged, and its absence in mainstream research needs to be highlighted more. And with that, I conclude my part, and you can read more about these findings in our paper, which is at this link and also at this QR code. And I'll give the floor back to Nahil now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Saru. That was very, very insightful. Actually, I think I learned quite a few things and you gave me a lot to ponder on. Because we're trying to stick to a very tight schedule, I'm just going to jump straight ahead to our next speaker, Professor Kamil Ben-Hamen from DOAJ. He's the managing director of DOAJ, and he's going to be talking to us about how we can work to produce a more inclusive and equitable scholarly system and open framework, specifically within the Arab world. So Professor Kemal, whenever you're ready, I can see that you're trying to share your screen with us.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I cannot turn the camera, please.
You can turn on your camera, no problem. I will fix that. Perhaps you went off and came back on. You should be able to do that now.
Okay. That's okay.
Great.
Okay, do you
Yes, we can
you
see
see
your
my
Yes, go
Professor
ahead.
Kamil, I'm sharing the screen for you, so if you can just let me know when your next slide is up, then I can change it for you.
okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nahil, for this kind invitation. Also, I think I thank also Dr. Emily for this kind invitation to participate for this symposium on dominance in knowledge production in global impact, and I want to share my my two about how to promote open science, especially in global South. Next, please. So, in the agenda, I wanted to develop 4 points about Western dominance in knowledge production and its global impact. Also, a factor underpin Western dominance and their impact on the in the world, also especially in Arab region, and also to develop towards a more equitable landscape. And then we give some strategies how DOAJ promoting open science and open access towards decolonialising knowledge. So next, please. Next slide, please. So the global academic landscape bears the undeniable imprint of Western knowledge production and dissemination. So from prestigious university to publish research, Western framework and the methodology hold significant sway, impacting not only the Arab region, but also academic spheres across the world. While these influences has brought undeniable benefit, access to research, standardization approach, and international collaboration, it also raises crucial question about epistemological diversity, local language systems, and the potential for intellectual homogeny. So next slide, please. So here we can give some factors underpin Western dominance. Especially, I am from the Africa, so I represent the voice from South Africa. So as you know, that the factor underpin Western dominance. This is topics widely discussed in the last 2 years in the forum, in symposium, and in conferences, especially about language emotion. As you know, that English as the dominant academic language, scholars and publication an inherent advantage in reaching a wider audience and gaining recognition. This creates a barrier, especially for non-Western scholars whose work might struggle to find the visibility and validation. So I give some example. My PhD student submitted an article, and it was rejected for the 3rd time because we have maybe the gap of language or the quality of language, and then if we need to publish in journal with high impact factor, especially, so we very low articles or papers are accepted, especially from Africa. So barrier for no Western scholar whose work might struggle to find the visibility and validation. And other thing, maybe Sorab can discuss this subject about metrics. As you know that the metrics can standardization, methodology, and evaluation metrics often roots in Western epistemologies can marginalize other form of knowledge production that rely on different tradition and framework. As you know, for example, in DOAJ, in Directory of Open Access Journal, does not approve of using impact factors or ranking metrics. However, journals, for example, display impact factor calculated by maybe from Clarivate or metrics from Scopus can be accepted, but this is a barrier for no Western scholars, and usually we have a problem with this metrics. So many discussion actually to skip those metrics and of course to put other metrics for especially for scholarly publishing from the South, Global South. Next slide, please. Some factors underpin also Western dominance. We can discuss also funding and research. As we know, the Western institutions attract significant research funding because they are well supported by some foundation and also their government. So this support can also, I mean that they can give more visibility for Western institutions than the institution from the South, Global South. This further reinforce their position as knowledge leaders, and the leader from I mean the Global South are marginalized. Other thing, a colonial legacy. As you know, that the historical imposition of Western education systems in many regions, including the Arab world, established foundation for continuing intellectual relays. So a lot of when we start some universities, so we need for staff from the north, and then we have this is a historical imposition. So we have Western education in most of Arab region, or also in Africa. The next slide, please. So impact Western dominance, especially in the Arab region. We can discuss about the, for example, the knowledge devaluation, indigenous knowledge systems, and the local language can be under-evaluated. We can see that when we need to publish in for example, in language other than English, we have a difficulty to have our publication in Western journal, for example. And the other thing, brain drain, as you know, that talent Arab scholars or African scholars may be drawn to prestigious Western university, do funding and opportunity and career prospects, because when we there is a talent from Africa that can be moved easily to the north, and then there is no I mean that the brain drain is also impact on this in this fact. So next slide, please. So towards more equitable landscape. Next, please. So, as you know, by valuing diversity, fostering intellectual self-reliance, and challenging existing power structure, we can move towards a world where knowledge is truly shared, not imposed, and where all voices have the opportunity to be heard and valued. Addressing those challenges require constant effort and multiple front. Next slide, please. So, enhancing the South-South, we can suggest some South-South collaboration, building a robust network and collaborative research initiative between institutions in the global South can improve academics, and also developing an alternative metrics. I told you now that the metrics is a gap for a lot of scholars from Arab world and also from Africa. So recognizing and valuing diverse research methodology and evaluation framework, and also investigating in local language, local knowledge systems by promoting the study and the valorization of indigenous knowledge. Also, those issue of Western dominance in knowledge production is not about dominating Western scholars or rejecting its valuable contribution. Rather, that it's about recognizing the limitation of singular epistemological perspective and striving for a more equitable and inclusive global academic landscape. Next slide, please. So DOAJ plays a significant role in the movement towards decolonizing knowledge by promoting open access and also open science, supporting diverse scholarly voices from the world, and especially from the South, global South, and also Africa and South America. Next slide, please. So just here about DOAJ Directory of Open Access Journal. As you know, this is an extensive index for journals, open access journals. So this mission to raise the profit, visibility, and impact of all quality open access journal globally, regardless of discipline, geography, and language. So we can index many journals from the world, especially from the South, global South. Next slide, please. So our criteria are unofficial gold standard for open access journal publishing services across the scholarly community. Our services are free, are provided completely free, and no charge for all. You can index for free your journals. Next slide, please. So as I have just make the update, as our website is evolutive and change every time. So today, the source, I consult our homepage. We index about 20,345 journals, open access journal, from 136 countries in 80 languages. So we can see that we promote languages and also especially journal from South. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Dr. Kamel, Professor Kamel, we have to wrap up because you're over time.
Okay.
But yes, so maybe we can just like with Dr. Knox.
Quickly, I move to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Next, please. Next. So here we can some case where DOAJ contributes toward decolonialism. So as I want to speak about promoting language diversity. So the DOAJ accepts journal from various languages and promoting multi-languages and challenging the homogeny of English. So we are the Helsinki initiative, which DOAJ was one of the first signatory of this initiative to promote multilingualism in scholarship and underline the importance of language diversity, among other things. Next, please. Next slide, please. So community project. Next slide, please. So as you see that many projects and to support open access journal. So we are a member of the Jasper initiative to preserve open access journal. Also, we promote the Think Check Submit as the knowledge is part of this project. Next slide, please. So DOAJ and the community are funded by funder of Think Check Submit open access journal toolkits, publisher learning, community exchange, partner of Diamas and Craft open access and open air. So this is DOAJ and the community. Next slide, please. So thank you for your attention, and please this email if you need any information about DOAJ. Can I help? This is my email address. Thank you, Nahil.
Thank you, Professor Kevin. And sorry to have to interrupt you. Like I said, we're just trying to stay in a bit of a tight time limit. Okay, so we will now move on to our next speaker, Jessica Malouch, who's the Director of Strategy, Research and Impact at the Qasimi Foundation. And she's going to talk to us a bit more about the community-based or ways that we can bring in the community when we're talking about decolonizing open science. So go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you very much, Nahil, and thank you very much for this opportunity to let me speak today. So I'm Jessica Malouch. As Nahil said, I am the Director of Strategy, Research and Impact at the Sheikh Saud bin Sakhar Al Qasimi Foundation for Policy Research here in Ras Al Khaimah, in the northernmost emirate in the United Arab Emirates. And we are a small community-based think and do tank. I'm very, very proud of our heritage. And today I'm going to be talking about some of our grassroots initiatives as we are located in the global south, about how we go about supporting open science and open research. So yes, just to give you a little bit of, actually, I'm going to set my timers because I do tend to talk. So just to give you a little bit of a history, the foundation was established, as I said, as a community-based organization in 2009 to aid the social, cultural, and economic development of Ras Al Khaimah and also the UAE and the MENA region. Our prime activity in doing so is generating and supporting innovative, high-quality research focused on education and social policy areas to inform decision-making. So we are really about building a high-quality body of research and knowledge to inform decision-making. So central to that mission that we have is really about having all of our publications and all of our research be open access, which we strive in every manner to have done. So we are very much committed to social development through expanding knowledge and open science. So I'm going to draw on some of the thematic elements that my colleagues have talked about and talk about how some of how it works on the ground for us and how we've thought about it in terms of both short-term gains in increasing research and the knowledge base, as well as the long-term sustainability for the growth of the entire ecosystem. And really, I'm going to be drawing on some of the themes about creating access, definitely about developing language and creating accessibility through language. through 3 of our ongoing activities that we've had for varying amounts of times, but are really thriving in the open science space. So the first one I'd like to talk about today is our academic journal, which we established in 2019. We are just publishing our 8th issue, so we have 2 issues a year. And this is really a space for, yes, developed scholars and scholars around the region, but also for emerging scholars to have a platform to have high quality, everything is double-blind peer review, to have a high quality space to actually publish. It is an open access journal, and all of our publications are open access on our platform through Knowledge E. So we definitely embrace the open access principles. In addition, we also have the strategic goal of being a bilingual publication. As my colleague just was talking about, the importance of expanding language. And because this, we engage a lot, and what is published a lot in this journal is applied social policy research. We not only want to have our audience be other academics, but also have increase it to policymakers, other stakeholders, and other people that are interested. And so one of our main foci is about creating sort of that language diversity through the being a bilingual publication. And as I also said previously, it's really a platform for emerging scholars to get support in increasing the quality of their publications. So the second activity that we really engage in, this is one of the core activities that we have had to increase open science and to create a more local, sustainable academic ecosystem in research, is through our research grants. So our research grants have been going on since 2013, and it encourages scholars both coming from international contexts. So we do have some of our scholars coming from the global north. We also have a large pool of scholars that are local and coming from the global south, sort of emerging scholars. And so it actually creates a great pool and also a great space for collaboration. So grantees, through this program, grantees get to engage with each other. We have more knowledge production about the global south that is occurring. And also, we also have local scholars from the global south that are going and being able to, we're supporting their research, and they're also publishing their research as well. Much of it through open access platforms. There are 3 types of grants that we do have. We have doctoral grants for doctoral students, obviously, faculty grants for faculty, and seed grants, which is through it's more of a collaboration of public-private partnerships where researchers can partner up with local businesses to promote innovation and collaboration. The final the final activity that the Qasimi Foundation does, we do more, but these are the ones I'm focusing on today, are our convenings. And this for us is really about creating a space for academics at the local and regional level, depending, so that they have space to exchange their ideas and increase their collaborative efforts. So one of those is the Gulf Comparative Education Society, which had its 10th biannual conference last November here in Ras Al Khaimah. And it really brought together around 200 scholars from across the region, locally, regionally, and some internationally, convening. And we are also planning another convening this April, which is looking more at non-state actors in philanthropy across the global South. And one of the things that the foundation is supporting is we have done an outreach for scholars in this one subject matter, and then we are supporting them to bring them all together and to exchange ideas with the hope that they will be presenting their work, getting feedback on their work, and then they will also be having a edited volume or a special issue as a result of this. So it's really, it's about creating the space, but it's also about, for us, about the dissemination at the end. So I'm not quite at my 10 minutes, but those are sort of 3 of the activities that I would say we're doing on the ground every day to sort of support open science and sort of decolonizing and supporting local scholars in the Global South. And that's it.
Thank you, Jessica. That was a very great overview and very I like when we have these conversations, they can be quite conceptual and they can get kind of abstract and a bit difficult to ground. So I like when we have presentations that are a bit more practical in their efforts. I thank you also for the fact that you didn't touch 10 minutes means that we might be able to salvage time. All right, so we are now moving on to Dr. Emily Chojnowski, who I think for the majority of us doesn't really need an introduction at this point. She's head of operations for Forum, and she's already done quite a number of activities with us and by her. And she will be talking about the way that we try to uplift and nurture Arab voices through open science and through Forum. So go ahead, Emily.
Thanks, Nahil. Slides, yes, the slides. So as Nahil kindly introduced, I look after the Forum for Open Research in MENA. For those of you who don't know, because I've seen a number of new names joining us today, so welcome. We are a non-profit membership organisation supporting the development and implementation of open science policies and practices in research institutions and research communities across the Arab world, aiding the transition towards more accessible, sustainable and inclusive research and education models in every Arab state. And finally, supporting the publication and visibility of Arab language research for the wider global scholarly community. Next slide, please. And our broad goals, more generally, are to promote and support the evolution of open science ecosystems in research institutions and communities across the region, to generate accessible, localized resources relating to all the development and implementation of open science policies and practices more generally, to encourage the development of collaborative community partnerships and cooperation between members and partners of our central entity, and finally to champion the development of right-to-left functionality in key infrastructure required for open science. And today I'd like to drill down a little bit more into what we're actually doing, because Forum is very much about practical guidelines and actionable insights, really doing everything, transforming kind of concepts and knowledge and goals into tangible actions. Because as many of our stakeholders are finding, it's not enough to just say, we will decolonize, we will globalize, we will localize, we will be open sciencey and all of these things. All these I's words have to be accompanied by actions, practical strategies, practical actions and practical goals. And it isn't always easy to overturn firmly entrenched procedural pathways and generational mindsets. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a great deal of strategic planning. And that's where we come in, helping organizations and communities across the region to build those all-important foundational structures, the policies and skill sets, the knowledge and resources, the community networks and collaborative partnerships they need to build strong, sustainable, open research infrastructures and enhance the social, cultural, and economic development of the Arab world. And as we've seen over the last few talks, when we talk about decolonization in the context of academic research, there are a number of pervasive areas of disenfranchisement within academic systems and structures that do very much need to be redressed. We have the assumed preeminence of the English language research produced by the Global North. We have the perceived prestige associated with publishing in English language journals owned by institutions in the Global North. And the corollary of this is that, as my fellow panelists have discussed, the research produced by and for the regions within the Global South is often either dismissed as of lower quality, even by researchers in that region, or is simply not even accessible to other areas of the world, owing to that index of focus on English language content. And as mentioned in the chat very vigorously, high paywalls and expensive subscription models continue to exclude researchers from less affluent nations. Next slide, please. Open science concepts have the potential to address some of these issues, and as we've seen in the preceding papers, not only by assuring everyone everywhere has free access to research and ensuring that localized research is visible and accessible for the wider global community, but also by ensuring that the existing social, political, cultural, and economic structures of the region, whichever region, in this case we're talking about the Arab region, but whichever region one is working for, are promoted and preserved, not subsumed into a globalized northern academic hegemony. Of course, with the open access movement hijacked by predatory and for-profit publishers driving up costs, with the university obsession with rankings focusing attention on publishing in high-impact English language journals, the open science movement has arguably left the Global South even more disenfranchised than ever before, as the aspirations for equity and inclusivity have had serious unintended consequences. And within the region, a few years ago when we were just starting out, we worked with a group of stakeholders to identify a number of additional challenges, many unique to the Arab region, which are particularly hampering the advancement of open science. And today I want to pull out one particular language, the first here on this infographic, which is language. And I'm going to discuss some of the things that we're doing to address it. Joy, if you could skip to the next slide. So there are 22 Arab states, and that means 420 million Arab speakers covering 30 colloquial dialects. And Arabic is one of the 6 official languages for the UN. However, there is a pronounced dearth of localized open science resources and solutions, whether individual guides, journals, platforms, everything really, in Arabic. And this has not only hampered the advancement of open science in general within the region, but has also been a barrier to the development of the kinds of collaborative communities which have seen huge success in other areas of the world, most notably, I think, Europe and Latin America. Until recently, moreover, there was no consolidated consensus on approved open science terms in the Arabic language, which obviously makes it very difficult to even get the discussion started, get that ball rolling if there's no communal lexicon for these discussions. And this not only made it difficult for Arab stakeholders to engage with global communities and resources on open science, but the lack of accessible, localized education resources further slowed down the development of essential capacities and capabilities within the key stakeholder groups. This, in turn, also contributes to a limited understanding of the benefits of open science, and even mistrust or misconception of key aspects of the movement amongst many of our core stakeholder groups. In addition, many organizations outside the region have disregarded the importance of the Arabic language and do not incorporate right-to-left functionality into their digital solutions and platforms, which, again, further slows down the implementation and installation of adequate and vitally necessary physical and digital structural frameworks. Finally, the negative consequences of policies emphasizing university rankings, which, as we've already discussed, promote English language research published in high impact, often US or European journals, has had a profoundly detrimental impact on the production and publication of Arab language research. So how do we try and help with this? Next slide, please, Jo. Our first step, and one we're very proud of, was to establish a shared language to talk about open science, to highlight our issues and to share those solutions which we can work together on. And we believe it's really crucial to the advancement of open science in the Arab region that there be a comprehensive and detailed lexicon of Arabic terms for key open science themes and topics, to ensure research communities across the region can really address and engage with this issue and produce their own localized resources tailored to the needs of their individual communities and institutions. Therefore, over the course of 2023, we worked with a group of dedicated experts, many of whom are here today, so welcome, from across the Arab region to produce a concise glossary of essential Arabic terms relating to the application of open science policies and practices in our core stakeholder groups. And while we appreciate that a project of this nature is inherently subjective, and that the multifaceted nature of the Arab language means that some translations and interpretations might vary within different regions and communities, our hope is that this glossary provides a useful starting point to help support engagement with open science practices and materials going forwards. It has been published, it has a DOI, you can access it via our Zenodo community and on our website. And we will be expanding it at 6 monthly intervals going forward. And already this glossary has proved invaluable for us as we transition to a fully bilingual model of communication with all our websites, communications, social media, emails, and all other collateral from now on being produced in both Arabic and English. Moreover, we're really thrilled that the glossary is already being used across the world by other open science advocates and not-for-profit groups to ensure that their resources and guidance materials are now also accessible for all Arab-speaking users. And going forwards this year, one of our big goals for the first half of this year is to start building our own library of freely available localized resources, offering actionable insights and practical guidance for our stakeholders and the wider regional community. We're also using the glossary to translate all our past events into Arabic, which, as Nahil mentioned, had by and large been in English. And we hope to be able to provide live instantaneous translation for all our events by the end of the year. Moreover, our next big project, which will be happening towards the end of the year, is to start work with all the major non-profit solutions providers involved in open science spaces to ensure that right-to-left functionality is included as a matter of course. And we'll be establishing a working group on this soon. So if anyone wants to join, is interested in this area of work, please do get in touch with either myself or Nahil, or just via our website contact form, and we'll add you to the list. Next slide, please. So we're particularly interested in this right-to-left functionality because we're already facing challenges ourselves in our own attempts to nurture a fully bilingual open science community for the Arab region. We really struggled to find a suitable online community platform that supports both English and Arabic and has all the functionality that we wanted. So in the end, we went with a Slack community, which we built for the region. It's freely available for everyone who wants to discuss and build networks, exchange ideas, share resources, regardless of who you are and what you do. However, although we ended up choosing Slack because of its functionality overall and its usability in general, it doesn't currently support Arabic. So now one of our big projects is to work with the developers of the product to really make sure that Arabic is ramped up to the top of their must-do list as a matter of urgency. But this challenge foregrounds, we believe, how language really is the essential building block for all of our capacity building and communications activities. And without a shared language, or rather the ability to share concepts across languages, we won't really achieve all of our goals. So as part of our long-term goal and our long-term objectives, is really to provide foundational resources and support the development of requisite digital infrastructures to ensure that our own regional community has a credible and authoritative voice, and more importantly, an audible and recognizable voice within that global open science arena. So if you can skip to the next slide. I want to conclude with a very brief digression, and I admit we're going against everything here by moving to a British poet from the 19th century, because in addition to my work for Form, I'm also an independent scholar of the 19th century literature, specifically Lord Byron. And although I appreciate bringing up a British poet in this context is not necessarily normally the most appropriate thing, this quotation is one of my favorite quotations, and I think it really highlights the value of what these discussions can do. because he really emphasizes the power of words to change the way we think, the way we act, the way we perceive others, and the way we are in turn perceived. And I'll just read these lines out and then we can move on. But words are things, and a small drop of ink falling like dew upon a thought produces that which makes thousands, perhaps millions, think. And as I said, these lines really resonate for me, because although this is just, and I think for today, because although this is just one small symposium, and as Nahil noted earlier, decolonization is a very large and highly contentious minefield of a concept. And every time we think a solution has been found, there's a risk of huge and dangerous unintended consequences, as has happened with open access and the eruption of predatory publishers stealing research. But if we keep talking and keep having meetings like this, keep involving the wider community in these discussions and expanding the languages which we use to conduct these discussions, we will find solutions. Final slide, please, Joy. So I just want to finish today by thanking my fellow panelists and all of you joining us online on behalf of Form for participating in this frank and transparent conversation about what decolonization should and could mean, what needs to be achieved and why. I just want to finish finally by saying we very much want to hear from all of you, both in the Q&A and in the post-survey event. So please do let us know what the challenges you're facing, what you think is important, and what we can do to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, very much for giving that overview of what we've been up to for the last 2 years. And now we're just welcoming our final speaker before we jump into the panel discussion. So Hassan Johnson, who's the Head of Training and Education for Inclusion and Equity in NYU Abu Dhabi. And he is going to be talking to us about, I guess, where those two worlds intersect as far as that training goes. So go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, thank you. I have a lot that I want to talk about, but I'm going to try to definitely respect the 10-minute limit. First, by saying thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here to share what we're doing here at NYU Abu Dhabi. This is who we are in terms of my particular office, with the Office of Inclusion and Equity. And our charge is to overseeing the institutional strategy for advancing the IDBEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Belonging, and Equity throughout the institution. And this is my team, my executive director, and my colleagues who work with me in this struggle to really just identify the fact that we have people coming from every part of the world coming to one institution in the Middle East and bringing who they are and what they know, where there are many opportunities for thriving and growing, and there are also many opportunities for friction and conflict. So we are part of the Vice Chancellor's Office, and some of the things that we do consultations, we identify resources and tools, we do training sessions, we do innovative strategies with regards to some of the things that have been talked about today, and I'll share some of those with you. And then one of the things that we really do is we are reaching out to the broader community and other institutions, such as Knowledge E and other organizations, to see how we can collaborate to bring forward this notion of IDBEA into their own institutions and to make it known to the world as a way of developing inclusion and belonging in different institutions. This is our network, so you can kind of see how global and how diverse the NYU educational system really is. We have these satellite campuses, 3 degree crediting campuses being Abu Dhabi, Shanghai, and New York. Now, I want to jump into why have this conversation in the first place. And the why is such a critical part. And a lot of our speakers today spoke about the why, but I want to kind of just reiterate some of these things as it relates, because I'm going to transition into decolonization and IDBEA and perhaps some action steps that we can talk about to address some of the issues that come up and surface from this. So we are looking to build a more inclusive scientific community. And the idea behind inclusivity is better retention and greater contributions globally. We are looking at ethical and responsible research practices and having some level of transparency and accountability there, and the implications more so on communities that have been marginalized and that have been vulnerable, what the impact, and being able to identify the impact and anticipate the impact of research projects are on those particular communities and involving them in that process as well. global collaboration and innovation, here's an example right here. Thinking about where everyone is in the audience and what they're doing and what time zone you're in particularly, being able to remove those barriers to knowledge and sharing collaboratively things that we are learning, things that we're running into, things that we're anticipating and finding as opportunities for future collaborations. And then the other part of this conversation, which is really key for us, is promoting equity in knowledge access and dissemination. So it was mentioned previously about gatekeeping and paywalls and all these other types of things. We are looking to definitely have this conversation and really identify ways to bypass these things and identify where people are gatekeeping and making sure that they're not necessarily keeping out people that are privileged over people that may need support and access in areas that isn't readily available to them. Also enhancing the quality and relevance of research overall, addressing historical and systemic biases. Much of this stuff has been talked about already, but identifying the colonial legacy, right? And we've done that already with our opening with Nahil. She did a great job talking about the colonial legacy and academic colonialism and how that's an impact. And then just reviewing quickly just some of the pillars that are really resonating today in terms of why we're having this conversation and the benefits of open science, which has also been touched upon by a number of the speakers as well. So I won't spend too much time on that as well. But I think the things that really stand out for me in my role at NYU Abu Dhabi is really looking at open source in terms of tools, software, and codes that are made available to folks. Open peer review, I think that's an issue in many institutions with regards to the role that certain biases may play, the role of power and privilege that it may play in terms of allowing certain folks and privileging certain folks to move through the academy and others who may not have access. And then looking at other collaborative ways to get together. Now, this whole thing around decolonization, I found the comments earlier so interesting. And I just wanted to offer, I'm not going to read this to you, but I just wanted to highlight the parts that were underlined as talking points for what I'm going to get into next. This whole thing around decolonization for me and what we do in our area, when we talk to faculty, staff, administrators, supervisors, we talk about this being a radical type of complete revolution in terms and really thinking about our thinking around how we become indoctrinated and socialized into the academy and into research and into teaching and learning, and how that shows up as a legacy from previous colonial experiences and different countries that we may belong to or may have been educated in. So really having those conversations and really doing that type of self-awareness work is really critical to this. And then the whole idea that doesn't really get talked about too much in some circles is the role of curriculum. And then just really understanding in any higher education institution, any area where people are researching and teaching and learning, the role that curriculum plays in terms of providing a way of identifying the knowledge that an institution says is important versus the knowledge that is not important. You look for it in the curriculum, and you look for how it's being privileged and centered in response to and connection to other sources of knowledge as well. So when it comes to open source and decolonization, the things that I think are really important to touch upon, given the short time that I have, is that when we start talking about this decolonization effort, we need to really talk about recognizing biases, not just institutional biases, but the biases of individuals that are working in these institutions as well, and acknowledging Eurocentrism and Western orientation. And as I heard people say earlier, Western hegemony, right? But also at the same time, valuing indigenous knowledge or knowledge that has been excluded, and also talking about equitable collaboration. And this means really, how do you partner with people in a way that is equitable and is not overly advantaging one group of people or constituents and stakeholders and disadvantaging others? And then looking at having research teams and people that come together in different voices being represented in the conversations, such as the ones that we have today, and then revisiting historical data. So the thing about this, which I think is key, is that a lot of research has been done and a lot of conclusions have been made, but have we gone back and looked at these types of outcomes and the types of methods and the conclusions that have been drawn from a different lens to kind of see where there might have been some biases or some concerns, and reinterpreting some of the data and some of the research that has been done from a much more inclusive and much more equitable lens. So I think that's one piece of it that's really key. Now I want to share with you, and I want to just be able to share with you how we kind of framed decolonization in our institution. And we had to acknowledge the colonial legacy of NYU in general, NYU Abu Dhabi in particular, and then the colonial legacy that kind of is connected to us by virtue of the region that we're in, and by extension, the broader area as well, the global context. And some of the things that we definitely had to think about is when we try to talk about colonialization, what are the things and what are the ways in which we can try to address these issues and, undo some of the things that may have been done, if that is even possible. And that conversation kind of looks at us in terms of three levels. One, when we look at individual institutional interventions that can be done in the academy and in these institutions, focusing on proportional representation, modifying the existing curricula, and with non-Western perspectives. So making an effort to say who's excluded, who's not here, and bringing those voices into what is already in existence. But then another part of this that really is important to acknowledge is really looking at the institution itself, right? The systemic analysis, where there might be, by virtue of the system being what it is, actually creating inequalities that aren't being acknowledged and recognized, and recognizing the epistemological hegemony within higher education. And that's a really key thing to do as well in terms of knowledge, understanding knowledge, how we know knowledge, how we access knowledge. But then the last piece is, and this is just more of a reality check, right? The ontological hegemony that structures and orients the existing university. So really being able to say, whatever institution I'm affiliated with, whatever institution I'm working with or in partnership with, where are the limits? What can be done? What can't be undone? And how do we work with that? Because I think we need to be honest with regards to how much the colonial legacy has been integrated and manifested into our own beings, our essences, the way we think, the way we even use language to define things in our experiences and in the world. So it's a lot. It may be difficult in many instances to undo some of that stuff that has already been done. But one of the things that we do is we have hope with this IDBEA framework, which I'm happy to introduce to you today. And this includes the inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, access. And what we want to do is kind of say, how do we overlay this and integrate this into open science, right? So inclusion being that now, what are the opportunities that we can create where we can have diverse groups of people who have access to scientific knowledge and can contribute to scientific processes and offer alternatives that may not be readily available or even privileged in certain institutions and what have you. The diversity part is also having a wide range of perspectives, making that an intentional and deliberate effort to make sure that different voices are included in this process. This is how the IDBEA framework overlays over the open science perspective and the framework itself. And then the other piece of this is looking at belonging. So when we identify people who have different perspectives, how are they actually contributing and offering value? And how are they being integrated to this collective pursuit of knowledge as well? And another part to that, the flip side of that is, how are they dissenting? How are their voices being offered to offer something that doesn't go with the flow, where they are able to simply say, we don't agree with this, this is a concern, and being able to make that voice heard and actually have some agency with that. And then the other piece to this in terms of IDBEA is equity. And this is really about thinking about how we can provide people with what they uniquely need to participate in science, and then also accounting for historical legacy, systemic barriers, and current contemporary systemic barriers that exist that certain groups may be negatively impacted by while others benefit from. And then the last piece in terms of access is saying, as this whole project is built on, is really about what information, data, and findings are available to all. How do we continue to break down those traditional barriers of paywalls and institutional access? Now, in our institution at NYU Abu Dhabi, here's how we kind of forward this IDBEA framework. We look at developing people, informing and advancing policies, creating and expanding resources, and designing community and targeted programs, which includes training researchers, talking to supervisors, really talking about guidelines and frameworks that kind of govern the way we operate within the institution, and really having difficult conversations around where there might be some inequities and identifying those inequities. The tool that we use to identify inequities is what we call an equity audit. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I do want to jump into the last part of my presentation, which is taking action and really stopping to think about how can we reimagine all the things that we've relied on and have just accepted as being truthful, credible, relevant, and real. How do we reimagine teaching? How do we reimagine just learning? How do we reimagine research and theory in and of itself? And so one of the things I just wanted to kind of put here without diving too deep is some of the language that we heard earlier and how this plays a part in our understanding of things, and think about ways you can reimagine, you know, epistemology and ontology and methodology and methods and data, given that the structure and the system is so integrated that whatever moves and whatever types of interventions we come up with to kind of facilitate changes may really depend on the resources and the will and the ability for us to collectively identify specific goals. And we may make some progress, we may not, but we can. Where we can make an impact is in really offering alternative perspectives with these frameworks, with this language, with these definitions that kind of govern how people operate within the research space. And I want to just kind of give you a few words on theory. This is because as a former faculty member, theory seemed to be the thing that really just cross-culturally, a lot of people, it was pushed by the academy and people were kind of like, well, this is how theory should be taught. This is how it is. And I think that, you know, when you look at what the function of theory is, it really falls in line cross-culturally with what we want to do. We want, and this is an acronym that I created. I'm actually writing a paper on it. It's called DOAJ, where the theory should describe, organize, predict, intervene, and explain things. And the idea behind this is that we also should account for culture, constructs, language, and power in this creation of theory, and in our understanding and usage of theory in research, in science, and even in teaching, and all other things that have to do with something directly or indirectly with teaching and learning. And so the scientific method in and of itself should be reimagined and rethought as well to account for excluded voices and knowledge systems that haven't been accounted for and included in our system. And an example of this is how can we rethink about theories that have been established and have been accepted from different lenses? How do we take theories that we have in textbooks and that we're required to teach and use as frameworks? And even when we publish and when we talk about what is your theoretical framework, how do we reimagine these things and look at these things and discuss these things, even critique them in a different lens that allows us to include different voices? And then how do we structure teaching in a way that's culturally responsive so that the people who are diverse, like the number of diverse students that we have coming from different parts of the globe coming to NYU Abu Dhabi, how do we allow them to access the knowledge and the information that we have available to them in a way that can resonate with who they are and how they show up in the classroom? Okay, so, and then the last thing is that I want to just kind of emphasize is this role of critical thinking, right? And not necessarily just being critical in your thinking, but being able to use it as a tool to engage in that dissent I talked about earlier, to identify things that are useful and not useful, things that where you can say in conversations, difficult conversations, I don't see myself in this research, or I'm seeing there's some exploitation or inequity in this particular project. And here's what we need to kind of discuss and talk about the relevance of it in terms of what's important, how it impacts me and why I think it's important. How do we apply this to people's lives in terms of our personal lives and our professional lives? And what questions do we still have remaining? This is a 4 questions technique, and there's been some research done on this as well in terms of teaching undergraduate students how to think critically. I think a lot of us as professionals could benefit from it as well, and this is why I shared it. I'm going to stop here and turn it back over. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much to all the speakers for the conversation and contributions, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Hassan. I feel like that was such a solid way to kind of similar to Jessica's talk, ground the discussion and recognize that it's such a conceptual and such a theoretical kind of bubble sometimes. So it's good to think of different ways that you can actually contribute to decolonial efforts. So if I can ask all of the speakers to turn on their cameras now. Obviously, as part of the agenda, we were supposed to sort of have a, nice 45-minute meaty, very, juicy discussion, but we've got about 5 minutes left. So I still would love to have, a nice, interesting Q&A portion for this event, but we'll just recognize that there are probably time limits. And of course, if any of the speakers need to jump off at 12, totally understandable. And just let us know and we'll wave you goodbye. So one of the first questions, which I think is like it makes me laugh when I think about it personally, but it's wondering at its core, is the decolonization ever something that's going to be possible? Is it actually an achievable goal? Or is it something that perhaps doesn't need to be achieved? Is it something that's, it's a means rather than an end? It's just something to strive for forever. If it is achievable, how do we think we can get there? If it's not achievable, I think we've all kind of touched on why this conversation matters, but if it's not achievable, then how can we frame it in a way that makes it still productive in this conversation? This is to everyone, so please, whoever wants to jump on, please go ahead.
I'll jump in because I just finished making that point. And I think that I do think that when people bring this up, I think part of it could be because there is resistance to change. And I think that there are people within institutions that don't want to leave what they spent so much time investing in to acquire in terms of credentials, knowledge, education, and so on. But I do think it is something that can be done. But I do think also too, maybe the language in terms of labeling it may not be the most accurate label in terms of, is it really decolonizing? And what are we actually doing? Like when we say we're decolonizing. So the examples that I gave were the 3 layers of levels of intervention that could be done in, in terms of 1, what a professor or researcher can do in their lab or classroom. Number 2, what an institution can do. And then number 3, acknowledging some of the ontological restrictions, like how embedded are the values and beliefs. And I think, Nahil, you said it when you first started, when we talked about academic colonialism, so there can be no others, right? And so this is the type of thing that I think is embedded and implied in terms of resistance to changing some of the things that the academies has been built on. But within the scope of change, I do think people can take individual effort, there can be institutional effort, but in terms of really undoing centuries of colonial legacy, I think it's going to be really difficult to kind of undo that and unring the bell when it comes to that.
Yeah. No, absolutely, 100%. Does anyone else want to jump in and give their 2 cents? I feel like Jessica, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead
then, Jessica.
No, I know that you actually need to leave in 2 minutes probably, so I'd love to hear what your contributions are.
I think I just wanted to appreciate Hassan's contributions at those different levels, because I think sometimes with a concept like decolonization, we do feel like it's so overwhelmingly large. What kind of efforts can we put in at the various different levels that will have some impact? So giving us those kinds of practical tips is absolutely fantastic. And just because something is or seems impossible at the outset is not a reason not to try to do it. And I think we all have to, to bear that in mind. At least a lot of science has happened, sort of big breakthroughs where people have tried the impossible. And so these are big structural changes that are required partly in science and partly within society as a whole. And I think there's a huge reward to be had by talking to each other across these boundaries and learning from each other.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. And I think that's, the core of why we even are hosting an event like this today, because the conversation has to keep going. Even if sometimes we feel like we're chasing our own tail a little bit, we have to keep trying and pushing the boundaries. Knox, you had your hand up, so I think do you want to contribute something?
Yeah, I will just say my short piece before I jump off. I think also us as a community or as an activist, we have to in the room who's making those decisions and who's contributing, because we can also fall into the trend of having the West describe what is open science to us and really not what the excluded minority group want open science to be, which it is principle open science is about equity and inclusion, and then all the other things I added extra. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think that's all right. Goodbye, Knox. But I think that's the core of it, is that this idea of being dictated to, which goes back to this idea of the global north being the center of knowledge and the center of how we operate and how we. So even when we are trying to decolonize, and this is a big conversation in terms of decolonization rhetoric, where so many of the biggest voices in decolonization are actually located in the global north, and they may come from, so I think of people like Edward Said, I might think of, a lot of Latin American, like, for example, the person that I referenced, Walter Mignolo, who are of global South descent. They have that heritage, but they're still very much rooted in the global North, and they've been educated in global North systems and universities, and they work in these universities. So it's this very complicated web of at what point can you say this is truly decolonial? At what point can you say you're not being spoken at, when sometimes the person who is speaking to you may embody everything that decolonization is supposed to be, but doesn't, you know, it's in here. It's kind of, it's the word that you said, Hassan, that can be a bit jarring for some people, this indoctrination, this thing of like our brains have already, we're so rooted in this already. And Jessica, the thing that I wanted to comment on was when we were discussing this topic in the first place, and we were talking about, you know, your contribution to the event, we were talking about this idea of indigenous knowledge and research, and how there's this methodology that you can't, like, if I was to be approached by, and even myself, if I was to be approached by a researcher who's like, well, I want to write an article about something, but there's no hypothesis, there's no method, there's no, it's kind of just vibes, you know, and it's in the most respectful way. It's not empirical in the way that we understand it to be. That would close many doors on that person purely because of the fact that they're not following Western models. But then it becomes a question of quality as well, right? So do you have anything you want to maybe add on to in terms of that?
I think that you've sort of hit the nail on the head when you know, this is the sort of the conundrum, right? Because not all writing is academic, but then we want to expand what is academic. So I think at the heart of it, and I think what my colleagues were talking about earlier, I don't think there's ever going to be sort of a bell and saying, we've reached decolonization, ding, 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 we've achieved it. I think it's really, it's about a conversation. It's about a respectful conversation. It's about sort of negotiating new boundaries, expanding those boundaries. And it is in that conversation, that collaboration, that creating space for that dialogue to happen. Because I think we, as a greater academic community, an inclusive academic community, can come together and decide, okay, what do we mean? What is academic knowledge? What is open science? And so those boundaries are always going to shift. They always have been shifting, and I don't see that changing in the future. When we're long gone, I think that there are still going to be conversations around this. So I see it as like an ongoing, constantly, shifting amoeba of sorts.
No, absolutely. One thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you guys are you're holding on, and I can see it, and I really appreciate that you're still here. So I'll only ask, one or two more questions. But one thing I wanted to touch on, and Jeffrey from the ISC actually raised this as well in the comments, which I thought was very important. It's this idea of exclusion when it comes to language specifically. So we talk a lot about how we need diversity in language, and we need to have more platforms that have language accessibility, and that we need to be publishing more research in different languages. But the problem becomes, how do we avoid in that, right, excluding people who are publishing in their native languages from the international system? Because we already know, I think at Forum, I don't have the exact statistic, but we know that there are already several journals that exist in the Arabic language. There are already several researchers across the board who are publishing in Arabic, but they aren't getting the recognition. They aren't getting, because linguistically, no one in the authority of knowledge knows what they're talking about, because it's not in this language, in the accepted English language. So how do we are there any ideas? Do you guys have any, comments on how can we work to balance between linguistic diversity and also inclusion at its real core? Inclusion, not just by just
I would say certainly this is where metadata and the work by Crossref and various other organizations really does help. It's not ideal that we have to share the metadata in English. obviously, as an academic who's not great at languages, I benefit from the dominance of the English language. I would not be publishing very much otherwise. But it's obviously it's not ideal that one has to, make accessibility by, again, transferring to a different language. But it does at least allow, it allows me. So my field, as I mentioned, is Lord Byron. Actually, a lot of people do publish on him in this region and across Eastern Europe and Central Asia, because he went traveling. He's very important in a number of those regions. So there's actually an awful lot of work published in other languages. So the metadata searches allow me to identify those articles. I know they exist. If the keywords and everything else look relevant, I can still go and pay for a translation, or find a friend, phone a friend and get them to tell me what they're talking about. And at least then I am aware, I'm able to see it on my radar and incorporate it into my sort of reading list, my research program, so that it's not ideal. It would be nice if everyone was multilingual. Unfortunately, some of us are not great with languages, but at least there is a way, provided the metadata is done. But from the publishing side, so we didn't mention this before, but in another role I have is Chief Academic Officer for Knowledge, and there part of what I do is run the Academic Open Access Publishing Unit. And one of the problems we have again and again is a number of our stakeholders, both the editorial boards and the individual authors, don't yet understand fully the importance of metadata. They often don't even provide it in Arabic, let alone in English as well. And so I think another big strand of this is really, it comes back to building those foundational skill sets, building that foundational knowledge that for whatever reason is not always as in place in some areas of the global south as it is in the global north. And so that then, if it's a matter of course, you provide an English translation of all the metadata, you provide those keywords, at the very least, people can find you on Google Scholar if you're not anywhere else.
Amazing. Okay, well, I had many questions. We were going to touch on brain drain, we were going to touch on commodification, we were going to touch on so many things. But in the interest of time and respecting our speakers who have given us quite a bit of their day already, I am going to end the discussion portion. Unfortunately, my heart is breaking, but
we can have another one. We'll just have to have decolonizing up to in a few months.